Okay, so let's look at your answers. I do want to make a note, however, with number 1. The usage of since in this case can be confusing. As you know, since has 2 usages. One is for the passage of time, and you're probably very familiar with this already because we've used it many times, but we use it to describe the passage of time. For example, she has been studying since 2 p.m. Or since last year, we have lived in this neighborhood. Okay, and the other usage of since is what we are learning now, and that is as a connector, as a word that can be used in place of because. Now, this usage of since can be a little confusing because we normally see a clause after since. So, for example, since people are cutting down trees, so you can see a subject and a verb. People are. Okay. Same thing here. Since there is not enough rain. Okay. So there is the subject and is the verb. So we normally see clauses, and that's why we call them, cause clauses. And in this case, there's no clause. It's just a noun phrase. Since global warming, some diseases are spreading more easily. So it sounds like it could be a passage of time, like since the start of global warming, or since global warming, meaning from the beginning of global warming, some diseases are spreading more easily. It looks like that, but then if you look at the effect, it says some diseases are spreading more easily. So because of this effect, we can see that this is supposed to be used as a cause clause. But just letting you know that it just sounds confusing because of the noun phrase here. And actually, it would be better to just use because of. Because of global warming, some diseases are spreading more easily. Okay, let's look at number 2. The temperature of the earth is rising, so there are more storms and floods. Okay, and then number 3, weather patterns are changing. Okay, therefore, there is too much rain in some areas and not enough in others. Okay, so as you can see in this case, there's a period, and then a new sentence begins with therefore, and then comma after the connector. Number 4, because, or you can use since, cities are getting bigger, more animals are losing their natural habitats. Okay, and as you can see in this case, you can see a subject and a verb. Cities are. Okay, so it sounds more natural. Okay, so we're going to go to our book on page 116, page 116. So this is our reading lesson, lesson D. So let's take a look at number 1. What is a fable? And you may already be familiar with a fable, especially if your children are young and they are in elementary school. They are probably reading a lot of fables. And a fable is a short story with a moral lesson, usually with a moral lesson. And a moral lesson is a lesson that teaches things about good and bad, things that you should do, or good lessons for life. So a fable is a short story with a moral lesson, or just with a moral. And a fable often includes characters like animals. And number 2, it says, do you know any fables or folk tales from your native country? Which ones? Okay, and a lot of fables and folk tales are cross-cultural, meaning the stories are well known all over the world, not just in one country. But of course, some of them are specific to certain countries. But we're going to read a couple of other fables and folk tales in this lesson, so you'll probably recognize them. Okay, and let's take a look at this note. Ask yourself questions when you read to identify a cause and effect relationship. So to find an effect, ask what happened. Okay, and then to find a cause, ask why did it happen. As you know, a cause is a reason, so we can ask why did it happen. Okay, so now let's take a look at the fable. Okay, the title is All Things Are Connected. Okay, so I'm going to play the audio and you can follow along.
Page 116, Exercise 2.
All things are connected. Long ago, there was a village chief who never allowed anyone to disagree with him. Whenever he wanted to do something, he asked the members of his court for their advice. But whether the chief's idea was wise or foolish, his advisers always said the same thing. Indeed, it is wise. Only one old woman dared to give a different answer. Whenever the chief asked for her advice, she always replied, "All things are connected." One night, the chief was awakened by the sound of frogs croaking in the swamp. It happened again the next night, and the next, and the next. The chief decided to kill all the frogs in the swamp. When he consulted the members of his court, they replied, as usual, "Indeed, it is wise." But the old woman kept silent. "And you, old woman, what do you think?" the chief demanded. "All things are connected," she replied. The chief concluded that the old woman was a fool, and he ordered his servants to kill all the frogs. Therefore, the chief slept peacefully. But soon the mosquitoes in the swamp began to multiply, since there were no frogs to eat them. They came into the village and made everyone miserable. The chief ordered his servants to go into the swamp and kill the mosquitoes, but it was impossible. Furious, the chief summoned the members of his court and blamed them, saying, "Why didn't you tell me that killing the frogs would make the mosquitoes multiply, and everyone would be miserable? I should have listened to the old woman." Because the mosquitoes were there, all the people of the village were forced to go away. Finally, the chief and his family left too. Until he died, the chief never forgot the old woman's words. All things are connected.
Okay, so now let's take a look at the next page. Okay, so let's look at this activity after you read. So check your understanding. Go ahead and take some time to complete numbers 1 through 7 and use or make complete sentences. Okay? You don't have to always restate. For example, what is the overall meaning or moral of this fable? And you don't have to say, the overall meaning of this fable is, that's called restating. You don't have to do that for this one because the overall meaning is going to be a sentence anyway, so you can just write the meaning or the moral. So just use your judgment, and if you think that it's good to restate the question, you can do that. If not, you can just make a complete sentence. Okay, so pause the video and continue when you're finished. Okay, so for number 1, we could say all things are connected. That's the moral. So you might also say every cause has an effect. That's another similar meaning. Okay, and number 2, what was the chief's main problem? So for this one too, you could just say the chief was awakened by the sound of frogs croaking in the swamp. Or you could restate the question and you could say the chief's main problem was that he was awakened by the sound of frogs croaking in the swamp. Or actually, some of you probably, or some of you might have said that the chief's main problem was that his advisors always said the same thing. And, that's a deeper problem. Okay, number 3. When the chief wanted advice, what did almost all his advisors say? Okay, and we could say, almost all his advisors said, indeed, it is wise. Okay, and then the second part of the question says, why did they say that? Okay, and you might have said, they didn't want to make the king angry, or they didn't want to disagree with the king, or maybe they were afraid of what the king might say, or what the king might do to them. Okay, so let's keep going. Number 4. Why did the chief assume the old woman was a fool? Okay, and we could say that she always replied, all things are connected. Or the chief assumed the old woman was a fool because she always replied with the same thing, or with the same answer. Number 5. What 2 things were connected in this fable? Okay, so we can say the frogs and the mosquitoes were connected. So the frogs and mosquitoes were connected. Or you could add more information and you could say the frogs ate the mosquitoes. Okay? Or the mosquitoes were not a problem because the frogs ate them. So something like that. Okay, and then number 6. In paragraph 2, what does croaking mean? And what words provide clues to the meaning? So the second paragraph is right here. And it says the sound of frogs croaking in the swamp. Okay, so we might say that croaking is a sound that frogs make. Okay, and as you can see, the sound of frogs provides clues for the meaning of croaking. And sometimes we understand what that's like because we have also heard the sound of frogs, especially in the summer, and you can hear them now. So it says here, awakened by the sound of frogs. Okay, so that phrase is a clue. And then number 7, read the last paragraph. Do you think the chief understood the old woman's words? Why or why not? So here's the last paragraph, and we might say, yes, I think the chief understood the old woman's words because the article says, or the story says, that until he died, the chief never forgot the old woman's words. Okay, so again, you could say, according to the story, the chief never forgot the old woman's words. So, I think the chief understood them. Okay, and that way you are also using effect clause. Okay, and then let's take a look at the next activity, and before we do that, I want you to look at the useful language box. It says, an antonym is a word that has the opposite meaning. So for example, the opposite of good is bad. The opposite of hard is easy. The opposite of tall is short. Okay, and you might have seen words that have the word anti or ant in the word, which shows that it's the opposite of something. So, for example, even the word anti means like against or opposite. So, and also the opposite of an antonym is a synonym. And a synonym is spelled S-Y-N-O-N-Y-M, synonym, which means a word with a similar meaning. Okay, but in exercise B, we are going to write the part of speech for each of these words from the story. Okay, so find them and underline them in the story. So for example, wise, you can see here, indeed it is wise, and here as well. But whether the chief's idea was wise or foolish, and then you can write the part of speech, and we can see that it is an adjective, okay, because it describes idea. So adjective, and then in fact you can see the antonym next to the word wise. So the opposite of wise is foolish. So if you need help, you can use a dictionary or a thesaurus, and you already know what a dictionary is, and a thesaurus is a resource that shows you similar words and opposite words of of words. So go ahead and pause the video and continue when you're finished with this exercise. So just do exercise B, number 1 and 2. You don't have to worry about 3 and letter C. Okay? Okay, so let's look at connected. So we can find the word connected here. All things are connected. And the part of speech is also an adjective. Okay, and for an antonym, you might write separated. Separated is the opposite of connected. And then peacefully, you can see the word peacefully over. I'm not really sure where I found it earlier. Yeah, here, the chief slept peacefully. Okay, so the part of speech is an adverb because it describes the word slept. And ly is another hint because lots of adverbs end with ly. And for an antonym, you might say noisily. Okay, and let's keep going. Multiply is over here. Why didn't you tell me that killing the frogs would make the mosquitoes multiply? Okay, so the part of speech is a verb, multiply, and then for an antonym you might say divide, multiply and divide, or even you could say decrease, because in this case the word multiply is not a math term, but it means like increase. Okay, so you could say decrease is the opposite. And then miserable, and everyone would be miserable. So the part of speech is an adjective. It describes everyone. And as an antonym, you might say happy or content. Okay, and the next word is furious. So here you could see furious, the chief summoned the members of his court. Okay, so furious is an adjective, and an antonym might be pleased or happy. And then summoned, here it says the chief summoned the members of his courts. Summoned means to call together, and meaning calling people to come together, and usually you do that to tell them something you want them to do. So usually we use summon for kings, queens, and an opposite word or an antonym would be banish, which is also usually used for when you're talking about kings and queens or rulers. So we could say the king banished his servant from his presence, meaning the king kicked out his servant from his court or his kingdom or his palace. So the part of speech is verb. And then blamed, we could see here, the king blamed, or the chief blamed the members of his court. So blamed is also a past tense verb. And we might use the word excuse for an opposite meaning, excuse, or these words are a little more difficult, but the words acquit and absolve are more like terms that we use in law, in like a court of law. Absolve, acquit. You can probably find those in the dictionary or thesaurus as well. But those could also be used as opposites of the word blame. And finally, swamp. We can find that here, the sound of frogs croaking in the swamp. Okay, so that is a place, so it's a noun. And I don't know if there's an opposite word for swamp. Maybe desert, because a swamp is moist and wet, and a desert is dry. But I don't really think we can say that swamp has an opposite word. It reminds me of when I was a kid. When I was practicing opposites, I remember this very clearly for some reason, but I was practicing opposites and telling them to my dad, and I said, sky is the opposite of ground, and then I said, bird is the opposite of fish, but my dad told me, no, bird is not the opposite of fish, and I was confused at the time because in my mind, in a child's mind, birds are in the sky, and fish are not in the ground, but they're in the ocean. And so, for some reason, it made sense to me that birds were the opposite of fish. But of course, now I understand, and it makes sense, of course, that animals don't have opposites. So, in the same way, I don't think places can have opposites. Like swamps and deserts are not opposites, just like oceans and deserts are not really opposites. We can say wet and dry are opposites, but not oceans and deserts. Anyway, you know what I mean. So you can leave this one blank. But we're actually already past the 20-minute mark, so I wanted to do 2 more activities, but we don't have time, so I will probably use those activities for our review in our next lesson. Okay, so this is the end of our lesson, and I will see you next time.